Disney still hates women, which is why their female characters are still terrible. Part 2. In our last video, we talked about how Disney only seems to value their female characters if they're masculine or if they're compared to the gold standard of masculinity. Today we'll look at a couple non-masculine ladies to see how Disney either villainizes or sexualizes them. So let's just jump right in with what sells. Sex! Black Widow is a really interesting example that starts terrible, looks like it's going somewhere, and then ends abruptly. The movies use Natasha's assets in two ways. She uses them to gain useless intel. Disney uses them to fill seats. Some of you recall the early Avengers movie posters where Scarlett Johansson was contorted in a way to somehow show off her boobs and butt simultaneously. Natasha Romanoff spends the first several years in the MCU as pure eye candy. Marvel tried to justify their blatant booby bait by making her out to be some kind of cunning honeypot spy, but it was half-hearted at best. Her shining moment was her slick interrogation of Loki that led to nothing. Hulk destroys the ship anyway. Earlier in the series, we see her breastily infiltrate Stark Industries in order to, again, nothing. She learns nothing of value. Her super covert spying of Stark results in the most obvious assessment of an extremely public figure.
Personality overview, Mr. Stark displays compulsive behavior, prone to self-destructive tendencies, textbook narcissism.
Really hard-hitting stuff there.
Agreed?
Contrast that with Captain America, who was also eye candy at first, but it was sprinkled into his character. He spends his life as a scrawny nobody, then he gets a makeover and takes his glasses off and suddenly he's hot. Same thing went on with the hunky Hemsworth and his Thor before they decided to completely dismantle that character. Both of those men have their looks referenced as a part of their character, not its entirety. My character arc is about getting you to hit the like button. Smooth as butter. Honestly, if you snapped Natasha's scenes out of existence, the entire franchise would barely change until the very end of Phase 3. We see her on screen from time to time, but ask yourself, what does she actually do? Now, before we finish with Scarlett, we should note that this phenomenon is not only limited to Marvel Disney. I have hope for the company's future, but let's not lie to ourselves and pretend they haven't done some weird sex stuff with kids' movies as well. Ursula suggests to 16-year-old Ariel that she can lasso Prince Eric by using body language. Hades realizes he can distract Hercules if he starts
throwing the right curves at him.
After Nala finds Simba, they wrestle for a little bit. Then she licks his face while laying on her back and gives him eyes that clearly say, "Please be in me," while a chorus in the background asks us, "Can you feel the love tonight?" That's a little, Cardi, how would you describe that?
That's weird.
Yes, very weird. Now, back to Natasha. It's a very interesting case study to see how her clothing and posture changes as the movies progress and Disney pretends they're going to develop her character. She gets the mildest of backgrounds with a 2-sentence romance scene with Bruce during Ultron, and they tack on that she wants a family because she was forced sterilized. You would be forgiven for missing any of this if you would happen to be, like, blinking at the time. Right before the finish line, they try to look like they're giving her something with, like, caring for Hawkeye and taking over for Fury, but it was half-hearted. It was clear that they were done with the character at that point. Everybody loves to propagate this fantasy that Marvel had everything planned out. There were references and seeds planted everywhere. It's just not the case. Yeah, they planted a lot of seeds and then they harvested a couple to look good. It's like when a psychic is right 1 out of 40 predictions.
I see the letter L, R, S, T, W, E, and B. So basically everyone's first date guess is in Hangman?
Thank you, Carlene. Your entire life is garbage.
Not only did the clearly set up Natasha Bruce ship fail to sail, but we also never got the buddy cop origin story between Natasha and Clint that I always wanted to see from their time in Budapest, which they reference constantly in the first movies. Let me know how you saw the origin story going. I saw buddy cop. Instead, we get a 5-second throwaway flashback in her delayed solo movie as she was being put out to pasture. Natasha could have had a really interesting story before she was forced to hand the baton over to the younger, sexier Yelena. That's Disney for you. But she was brushed aside for Captain Masculine and given the half-assed noble sacrifice ending. Now let's be very clear about something. Come here. The solution to this problem is not to purposely uglify female characters. It's to give them an actual character arc instead of just character curves. Denying Natasha a family is not isolated, however. For Disney, wanting a family has always been seen as an unattainable fantasy at best. At worst, it makes you crazy and turns you into a villain, which is the case for Wanda Maximoff. Again, we see a female character with zero depth at the beginning. Marvel attempts to tack on some kind of story and then abruptly discards everything. At first, Wanda is just another Marvel soft villain with terrible dialogue. An accent that seems to change from movie to movie, sometimes shot to shot. She's very immature, she's bent on petty revenge, and she's getting used by pretty much everybody. We should note there's nothing inherently wrong with this thus far because it allows for character development if you have talented writers. We then see her start to develop a character with Vision, and it's obvious that her main goal is family, which makes sense because hers was stolen. Unlike Clint Barton, when her family is taken away, she becomes a psychotic murderer instead of Hawkeye's dark justice vigilante. Even though we see Clint regret his actions, they're never shown in an overly negative light, and he gets to be redeemed, while Wanda tries to kill everyone in order to change dimensional reality. She had potential. She was so powerful. Once she matured and fully realized those powers, she could have had like a great power, great responsibility type moment.
I was rooting for you. We were all rooting for you.
She had a great relationship with Captain America and Vision. They could have made the Avengers like a surrogate family, like they almost tried to do with Black Widow. I'm seeing a pattern here. Both women had to be sacrificed instead of getting that family. Such is the message of Disney. WandaVision literally treats her needs like a goofy fantasy. At this point, Disney is firmly on the girl boss train, and obviously their writers think that suburban housewife is like a more disreputable role than puppy euthanizer. It's clear from the outset that Wanda is written as weak because she's relying on men. First it was her brother, then Ultron, then Steve Rogers, then Vision, so on and so on. In the writer's eyes, her need for anything but strong independence is weakness. That's why so many of these female characters are hyper-independent assholes. The writers think that looks strong? The show portrays her needs for family as a silly TV fiction, with Wanda bouncing from one genre to the next, audience laugh track and all. She is never given control of herself. First, she's naive and used. Then she's infatuated with Vision and rebelliously running away. Then she's living a fantasy sitcom life. Then finally, she's a rampaging lunatic. Wanda was a plot device with lines. That's why people make fun of her powers so much. They're the same way. What are her powers? Red. Her power is red, and it does whatever the writers need whenever they need it. Look, if she had to be a villain, she could have been a good, twist, long-term villain instead of just a sudden psycho. After losing things and feeling betrayed again and again, she could have just turned her blame on the Avengers for losing her parents and children and brother and Vision.
Emotional damage!
I mean, basically the story would have gone the same way as Doctor Strange, except in a more methodical way instead of the breakneck speed lunatic that we saw. She would have been like Thanos, like a build-up villain, except we as the audience would have already seen her as a good guy. She could have even had the misguided villain motivation, like, I'm gonna stop all suffering or something. I still dislike the turn to villainy, but at least her character could have been given some respect. Instead, we got a character in Doctor Strange 2 that resembled no Wanda we had ever seen before. Sadly, in the end, she was used one final time by Disney itself to sell the multiverse idea before tossing her aside. Maybe one day Disney can wake up and write real women instead of message boards, and I hope that day is soon. Thanks for watching. I'll see you next time.